Hello, I'm Flown, and this is my game Legion of Die, an action roguelike where your weapon changes whenever you roll. Think Enter the Gungeon meets Dice with a little bit of Cuphead influencing the setting and music. Okay, maybe lower your expectations on the music there. Okay, that's good. You can stop now. No, not that To tell you the story of how this game came to be, we have to go all the way back to the summer of 2022, during the GMTK Game Jam where the theme was Roll of the Dice. During this Game Jam, I made, you guessed it, a completely different game where you'd fight bosses and spend some of your precious health to re-roll your weapon. The different bosses had different weapons that were most effective against them, but the game ended up being a pain to balance and ranked pretty poorly in the jam. This seems to be a recurring problem when I do game jams. I'll come up with a cool idea, but then when it's actually created, it ends up being really hard to encourage the player to play the way I wanted them to. Moving on to about half a year later, I was thinking back to this game jam and wondering what might have been a more interesting idea. Specifically, I was thinking about the game Randomancer, which is a tower defense game where your tower is determined by rolling a dice. The interesting thing about this game is that your dice is a physical object in the world that can damage enemies. This made me think, what about a game where you play as a dice with the ability to fling yourself around to damage enemies, like in Randomancer, but with a catch? Whenever you flung yourself into a roll, you would also change to a random weapon depending on what side of you, the dice, ended up facing up. After coming up with this idea, I started work on the game design document so I could get a more concrete idea for what the story and gameplay would look like. This game is a roguelike, meaning whenever you die, you'll have to restart from the beginning. I figured that this would need to be incorporated into the story in some way, so I came up with this. Each run, you play as a different intern for a government organization who's trying to take down the Casino Mafia for unlawfully rigging the odds of their games. The Casino Mafia has their headquarters atop a large, multi-floor casino with each floor below containing more and more restricted areas that the player has to make their way through. There are 6 floors in total, and at the end of each floor, the player will face off against a boss who serves as a sort of security guard for the entrance to the next floor. After getting that planning out of the way, I started work on prototyping the game. To start, I got some basic rolling and movement working. I immediately ran into a problem with the rolling where, because it was so fast and sporadic, it would force the camera to move in a super jarring way. So I just disabled the camera movement for a bit. After that, I added guns and smoothed out the camera so that I could have it follow the player again. Even with the improved camera, I had to slow down the rolling speed significantly to get it to look good. Now, past me was kind of stupid, so after only a week and a half of prototyping with placeholder assets, I started implementing the art, and this is what it looked like. And this is what it looked like. You know, this honestly looks more like a prototype than when it didn't have art. But as you can see, this gave a bit more character and the game was starting to really shape up. But there was one major flaw with this version of the game. It was made in Unity. Now, I know you're expecting me to say something about Unity's pricing model here, but that all happened like a year after this. The real reason I switched to Godot was... Yep, it was the new text all along. Basically, Unity's text and realistically its entire UI system kind of sucks. Like, look at this. If I make this text too small, black boxes. If I make it too big, black boxes. And if I don't spend like 10 minutes fiddling with these settings, I get rounded corners and maybe black boxes as well. And don't even get me started on the pixel perfect camera. Like, please tell me why, when it encounters a weird screen size, does it zoom out, breaking my entire camera setup instead of zooming in? Anyways, Unity rant over, I started porting the game over to Godot. I started by getting the basic movement and rolling systems working before implementing the guns. Instead of using a normal animation system for the guns, I went with an approach where their animations are mostly specified by these curves linked to the gun's gun script. I also added in some basic game juice, i.e. screen shake, a muzzle flash, and some effects for when the bullets hit the walls to make things look juicy. After that, I started work on the new room system. I was inspired by the way Archvale handles its rooms. In Archvale, the camera is locked to a specific room, and walking outside of that room's boundaries will transition you to the next one. The thing I wanted to improve on with my system was the somewhat disjointed feel caused by the rooms not actually being beside each other. The way I solved this is by having it so that whenever the player exits a room, the next room is spawned in and positioned in a way where its entrance lines up with the exit of the room that the player just left. I also wanted to add a little bit of variety to the rooms, so I created a system where entrances can be either open or closed depending on what rooms are around them. This means that rooms that have this feature can be placed anywhere in the map without having to worry about whether their entrances line up. Huh?
Breaking news. We are just receiving reports of somebody who hasn't wishlisted Legion of Die on Steam. And what's that? My producer is telling me that there is a link to do so in the description. How odd. Anyways, if you happen to see this criminal, please report them to the police immediately.
Not sure what that was about, but after doing the room system, I started to work on the enemies. The first floor is going to have 3 enemy types: the Cigards, the Chippers, and something else which I haven't decided on yet. The Cigards are these little cigarette-looking guys who will shoot burning embers at you from a distance. They're meant to be the sort of punching bag enemy, something to fill up the space and put a little bit of pressure on the player. The Chippers are meant to be big, fast, mini-boss type enemies, and thus they have a charge attack where they run at you really fast. Luckily, they have a very slow acceleration and are there to make the player think more about what direction they're moving. As for the last enemy, I'm saving that for when I've done more playtesting and know what niche needs to be filled. Anyways, apart from some minor tweaks, that brings us up to speed with the development of this game so far. Remember to wishlist the game on Steam if you haven't already, and have a nice day.